Hey, everybody, I want to talk about a product and platform that I absolutely love and our latest sponsor, Interseller, the prospecting and outreach platform of choice for recruiters and sellers. Whether you're doubling down on business development or recruiting talent, Interseller does all the heavy lifting of finding contact data, automating the email and follow up process, and syncs all that rich data into 20 plus CRM and ATS platforms. Reach out now and get going on a 2-week free trial and let them know you heard about it from Adam on the podcast today. Check out the link on the website. Appreciate it.
Welcome to the podcast, where we introduce you to incredible humans who share their journeys with the mission to inspire you to harness your own inner tenacity to drive your life and career forward. And now, your host, Adam Posner.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast, where I bring you the best and the brightest from the world of business, marketing, and personal growth to help you harness your inner tenacity and drive your career forward. Folks, my guest today, Bryan Adams, is the CEO and founder of PH Creative, recognized as one of the leading employer branding agencies in the world. And they specialize in building world-class employer brand, EVP, and talent engagement strategy for companies, little companies such as Apple, American Airlines, GVC, and Blizzard Entertainment. And Bryan is considered a prominent employer brand thought leader, and his creative, unconventional, and even controversial methodology are said to regularly change the way people think about employer branding. We're going to unpack that. As well, he's a 2-time best-selling author, podcaster, and specialist speaker. We will dig into all of that and a lot more, so let's get started. Bryan Adams, welcome to the podcast.
Adam, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much for being here today. So let's get started. Before we dig into employer branding and how you built your agency and all that kind of fun stuff, I love to talk about the early days. And you were a graphic designer at Facto Mag. First and foremost, tell us a little bit about Facto Mag, because I don't think that mag is on everybody's coffee table. Tell us a little bit more about Facto Mag.
No, it was a bit of a startup dream of a small group of kids into design and fashion and homewares, and it was a regional labor of love very early on in my career, actually. And I was a designer working 16 hours a day. It was a monthly magazine. I was the only designer, and it was relentless. But I look back on those days fondly. It was good fun.
And a little fun note, you had the opportunity to interview James Brown. Take us back to that interview. How did it happen? Where did it happen? And tell us about the man, the myth, and the legend.
So it was such a weird way of it came about, because as a designer, I didn't really interview many people or get to meet any of the fun people that were in the magazine at all. But this one rainy day up in Liverpool, we were thin on the ground. People had called in sick, and there wasn't very many people around at all. And this interview had been on the books for weeks and weeks. And for whatever reason, it felt to me, they said, "Look, Bryan, you're going to have to do this." And I was like, "Look, I can't hardly remember my name at this point. I can't interview James Brown. This is insane." But I was forced to do it. I stepped up, very nervous, but it was incredible. And actually, halfway through, I remember thinking, actually, I'm doing okay. I'm actually not a bad interview, but reflecting on it, I could have said anything, and it was just the absolute consummate professional giving me fantastic pearls of wisdom, regardless of the dumb questions I was asking. It was probably one of the most surreal 30 minutes of my life, actually, yeah.
That's absolutely incredible. Was there one moment from that interview that you remember, like, vividly? One moment, did he say something to you? Did he look at you a certain way? Was it the way he acted, he smelled, he dressed? Something that really resonated with you that you always think about?
It was a telephone interview, so I didn't get to smell James Brown.
That's it.
That's it. But there was just a wash of wisdom. I remember thinking it was kind of like speaking to your granddad or whatever. And but actually, my head was so muddled just trying to remember what the next question would be and all the rest of it. So I didn't really get to appreciate the moment at the time. It was listening back and reflecting on it afterwards, which was, more special than anything else.
Totally, and that's something that you could you could put that on your gravestone, right? No, interview James Brown over the phone and had nothing memorable. No, we're just kidding there. So let's fast forward. How did it happen? How did it happen from being a graphics designer to saying, you know what, I am going to launch an agency all about employer branding, and we're going to get to the actual definition of employer branding. But how did that migration and that transition happen?
Yeah, so I was working for that magazine, really long hours, very stressful, and but I mean, I was young, youthful, full of energy then. So I was pushed to the brink one fine day, and I remember I'd done something to really mess up, and I owned it. It was my fault. But the boss came out and in front of about 50 people, bawled me out and made me feel like 6 inches tall. And he was a
Uh-oh.
huge guy. He looked like Bluto from Popeye. And I can still, if I close my eyes, I can
Yes.
still smell his coffee breath bearing down on me. So I, I just, I stood up one day. I stood up after I'd been bawled out in front of all these people and left the office and never went back. And I started the agency the next day.
But was the intention for it to be a creative shop? How did you decide to focus on employer branding?
So we're coming up to 17 years old now. And for the first 8 or 9 years, we were a digital marketing agency. We did branding, we did um, websites, we did print design because we did print design back then. It was still popular.
Remember print?
Yeah. And then over time,
Remember print? Remember
yeah,
printed magazines?
yeah. So the good old days, but yeah. So we gradually started to gravitate towards a number of our clients, which just happened to be in the recruitment space, and it was more just sort of we fell into it than anything else. Really, we realized that speaking to people in HR were easier to get hold of than marketing directors. And slowly we started to focus just because we saw an opportunity to carve a niche rather than having 6 million and one marketing competitors. There wasn't many agencies around specializing in employer brands. So that's what sort of gravitated us towards it. And, since focusing on a niche, we haven't looked back really. So I wish we'd done it earlier.
That's fascinating because I'm a big believer in niching. I'm a big believer in being an inch wide and a mile deep. I think that the riches are in the niches, and I think that you've proven that quite successfully. So before we go any further, I would love to hear your definition of what employer branding means. For anyone out there that doesn't know, what does employer branding mean?
Yeah, so if you Google it, you'll see lots of different definitions, but essentially, it's nothing more than how people describe the employee experience and how it feels to be part of an organization. So, in short, it's your reputation as an employer.
I think that's a spot on definition. And what are you seeing in the marketplace on both sides? I'd love if you could share what you're seeing that companies are doing right and then what companies are doing wrong, especially now during the pandemic.
Yeah, so interestingly, if nothing else, 2020 made organizations recalibrate and reprioritize the importance of their people for a variety of different reasons, by being called out in the media for doing things wrong or by being congratulated, and having the public spotlight mean that the sentiment of a brand generally goes up because they've treated the people well, So I think what we're seeing now is
Absolutely.
a trend of organizations doubling down on the value of their culture. And we're seeing at CEO level business strategy now, including employer brand and designing candidate experience, employee experience, and all this stuff, where historically over the years, it's been a poor relation to consumer marketing and branding. And thankfully now, I'm glad to say, in this sort of space that we're in, that's starting to level up. In fact, we're seeing a lot of evidence that organizations that invest in their employer brand, the stock price goes up. There's direct correlations with people who invest in organizations that invest in employer brand. the value of the organization increases. And also there's a halo effect with employer brand crossing over into
100%.
benefiting general marketing and consumer branding.
100%. I was going to save this for a little bit later, but let's talk about the Virgin case study around candidate experience. And for anyone who's not familiar, it was a case, correct me if I'm wrong, it was a case study that successfully quantified the commercial cost of a poor candidate experience at over $5 million a year. So it really made that connection between the candidate and the customer and proving the business case, how the industry should really approach the values around customer, around candidate and employee experience.
Yeah. So we did that work with Virgin a good number of years ago now, but that was the first time that anyone had tangibly correlated the value of candidate experience. And put simply, it's a consumer facing brand selling broadband to millions of people around the world. And what we looked at and discovered was because their candidate experience was so poor, people were having a poor recruitment process and going home and switching their broadband to a competitor at the cost of $5 million a year. And at the time, Virgin had no idea whatsoever. So it was a $5 million a year hole that we plugged. And actually then they doubled down, they improved their candidate experience, and since then they've looked at how to make the candidates that they're interviewing and attracting into potential new customers. So flipping that script, and it's it's interesting when you think of it from that lens.
I mean, it absolutely is. And what I always like to say, because I'm a recruiter by trade, I have my own recruitment practice here. And what I tell companies is your candidates, their experience in that recruitment process, that's their first foray, their first taste, their first touch of engaging with your company. They're going to be your ambassadors. Eventually, they're going to come into it. So that's why the value of that. And when leaders truly understand that it's people first and they invest into it, and they don't think that HR and recruiting is some back office operation, that's when they see the ROI. That's when they see it. But I want to rewind a little bit because I come from the advertising agency world, and I'll talk to you offline about my history, but I started 15 years working in advertising and marketing before I got into recruiting. So I consider myself a true markruiter, Bryan. I am a markruiter. I am that hybrid marketing and recruiter expert. I love to understand the process a little bit. New client comes to you and they say, Bryan, I need your help. What are those steps, those discovery steps to really understand and unpack what's currently happening in the company as far as employer branding and EVP?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing to point out is everybody has an employer brand, one way or another. Whether it's been designed or considered is a different matter. So essentially what we set out to do is understand the direction of travel from a business perspective, where people fit into that strategy, where the gaps are, where the strengths are. And the research piece is key, because if the employer brand isn't authentic and genuine, if it isn't transparent, then really, anything else is built on sand. So the research is really important. It needs to be really representative of the employee experience, but there needs to be a healthy dose of aspiration in there as well, so it's forward facing and useful for the organization. But the big difference with how we approach employer brand is compared to the marketplace is, a lot of organizations fall into the trap of just trying to be generally one of the most attractive brands in the marketplace, trying to attract more people towards them from an attraction perspective. And we believe that actually your employer brand should be designed to repel more people than it attracts. It's more like a smart filter rather than a magnet, because
I'm smirking because I agree with this.
You've got to be comfortable, in fact, confident with the fact that your organization isn't for everybody. So you owe it to your audience and you owe it to the business to define who it is for, who is it ideally calibrated towards. And the decision of where to take your career next is, one of the biggest decisions in your life. You've got to make sure that you invest those years wisely. And also, organizations, if you set out to attract millions of people towards your brand, as a recruiter, you will know, there's a whole industry that exists to deal with the deluge of applicants. How can you possibly screen and sift through all of those applicants, and deliver a candidate experience? So isn't it better? The best candidate experience is giving people information enough so they decide not to apply in the first place, you know? It's not about the volume, it's about the volume of valued applicants. And that's what we set out to do with our employer brands.
100%. Absolutely. So the question is, how do you even go about communicating a company's value proposition creatively? How do you go about creating copy and language that, as you say, attracts the right candidates and repels the ones that might just be, hitting that apply button because, either they're out of work or,
Yeah.
they're kind of desperate to leave their job? What are some of those inside, kind of, not so much tricks, but what are some of those, principles and approaches when you're crafting that strategy?
Yeah, so whatever you come up with, it has to differentiate against your competitors. And a lot of the time, you could take the employer brand of a company and put it beneath the logo of any of your competitors. And that's the first litmus test that we will do. It's got to be
Plug and play.
differentiated. It's got to be relevant to your audience, and it's got to be something that you can build a moat around and protect. But the best example that I can give you isn't a company at all. Actually, it's the U.S. Marines, the Navy SEALs. There's something called Hell Week. If you want to be a Navy SEAL, you've got to get through something called Hell Week. And I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound particularly appealing to me. But the reason people are so proud to be a Navy SEAL is because they have what it takes to get through Hell Week, and they wear that badge with pride and passion. Now, I'm not saying every organization should have their version of Hell Week, However, there are harsh realities.
Yeah, especially in this day and age, it might be a little litigious.
Yeah. But, there are harsh realities and adversities inside of every organization. And through our research, what we found is that's the quickest way to find passion and pride and discover what your brand stands for. And that very thing is often what will have lots of people running for the hills and say, this isn't for me. But those people that think, actually, that's worth it to me. That challenge is big enough. I really am attracted to that. They're the ones that are compelled, and they're the ones that lean in. So if you can galvanize an internal workforce based on acknowledgement and appreciation for what they do, whilst creating something that will separate the herd externally, and put people to a proper decision, then the employer brand is actually adding some value. If you just want more volume, turn up the dials, do more recruitment marketing. But employer brand is there to authentically speak the truth in a compelling way.
No, 100%. So let's talk about how you built your brand at PH Creative intentionally. How do you be the shining star? How do you lead by example?
Well, it can be a high wire act, actually, but I'm lucky because we've built a culture where people aren't afraid to call you out, and if we're overstepping in terms of not walking the walk, we're soon pulled into line by our team. But our vision is everybody loves their job. If we can help some of the world's largest employers articulate who they are so people can make better career decisions, then our vision is everybody can make better career decisions and find a job that they love. And we call ourselves the defenders of happiness. So we set out to bring industry happiness, client happiness, and people happiness. And it's, we use KPIs to measure happiness internally and externally. And it's no mean feat. It's a challenge. But it comes down to this, agency life isn't for everybody. It's really hard. It's relentless. It's intensive. You need...
You have to know what you're getting into.
Absolutely. It's a challenge. So happiness isn't pleasure. For us, happiness is victory. It's an emotional roller coaster at our agency, just like any other. So we're very open with that. Our employer brand internally is love the struggle, because every day can be a struggle, and we want you to love every inch of it, because if you don't, agency life isn't for you. It's a very specific type of person.
Love the struggle. Love the struggle. Love the struggle. I'm sitting with that for a moment. Love the struggle, and I think that really resonates to the fact of the journey, right? Like what we're trying to accomplish. And struggle is not such a negative connotation, right? But it's referring to the process.
Hmm. Yeah, anything worthwhile
Wow,
is a
fascinating.
challenge.
So let's talk a little. Yeah,
You know,
nothing worthwhile is easy.
exactly.
And what would you say has been your personal biggest struggle over the last 17 years? Sorry,
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, over the last 17 years of building an agency, through different economic times,
Mhm.
different global geopolitical pandemics and everything, what has been the biggest challenge for you as an agency leader?
That's a great question, and I think it's a bit cliched, but I've got to go with imposter syndrome. I wake up every day and I just make it up as I go along. And they say experience is a series of mistakes. Now, after 17 years, I've made a lot of mistakes, so I guess I'm quite experienced at this. But it's definitely that idea of feeling like somebody more experienced could come along and do it better. And the secret really is surround yourself with great people who are better than you. And I know that sounds like a cliche as well, but it's really true. And as we scale now, we hire people from different industries with really diverse experience and skill sets, and it's a joy to watch, to be honest.
No, that's fantastic. I absolutely love hearing that. So let's talk about the pandemic for a little bit. Right, from your perspective, I mean, you work with many different companies. You have a insider perspective. So what companies do you think are going to come out on top, attracting the best talent once this pandemic eases up and people start to feel a little bit more secure, not about going back into the office per se, but they feel more secure about transitioning or changing jobs?
Yeah, so I really do think that organizations that have proven to do the right thing by their people are gonna win out for a number of reasons. It's going to make them naturally attractive to people who are looking for stability, work-life balance, and just equity and inclusion is now on everybody's mind shelf. Organizations are being called out for it left, right, and center. Some good, some bad. But the biggest shift we've seen is how you treat your people is now tangibly translating over to how people spend their consumer dollars. So you're either winning at both ends or losing at both ends, and there's so many different examples out there. And speaking to our clients of a variety of different sizes, we're seeing that play through time and time again.
Yeah, that's tremendous. And I read that shortly after the pandemic started, that PH Creative pledged $7 million to employer branding causes. Is that right? You pledged $7 million. That's tremendous. How did that initiative pan out? And tell us a little bit more about who you're trying to help specifically.
Yeah, so it was interesting because I think there was a period, pandemic kicked off in March, and by April and May, people were sort of getting the house in order, and there seemed to be a swell of sort of community spirit and organizations, large and small, looking around and seeing how they could uplift people around them and help organizations, etc. And as an employer brand agency, we scratched our head as to like how can we possibly help organizations, and what we settled on was if we can make the transition of people losing their job and finding another job better, or we can help organizations who are scrambling around now trying to either let people go with grace en masse or hire lots of people because they have a change in circumstance. If we can ease that process, then we're doing our part. So we created a fund and made it available for organizations to have better career websites to make that that candidate experience more efficient, and we did that for organizations small and large, and it was really, I wish we could have done more. It was $7 million worth of technology, which so that's sort of retail cost, if you like. So it wasn't 7 million dollars we put in our hand in our pocket, but still, it was what we could afford at the time. We were still battling challenges ourselves, but we look back on that, and I think it was a morale booster for our team. It gave us purpose when we were really needing a focal point. So it had multiple benefits internally as well.
That's tremendous, and absolutely, we've seen so many companies pitch in and help in every way that they can. So let's talk for a moment about how you hire. What are a couple of the principles? Actually, I'll spin this and make it a little bit more fun. What are a couple of patented, trademark, copywritten Bryan Adams interview questions? Well, we love to ask candidates during an interview.
So my team doesn't really let me interview.
This people. Is my employer branding. They gotta come watch. They gotta come watch this show before an interview.
So I'm not allowed to interview people until at the end. These days, our team are guardians of the culture. All our questions are based around our employer brand, as you can imagine. But I like spending time and disarming people by asking them lots of questions about themselves and giving them space to ask me questions. And actually, I tend to find out a lot more about somebody when I see what questions they ask and how they just have a conversation. One thing that we used to do in the early days was I would always interview people whilst playing foosball, like table football, for a couple of reasons. One, to see whether they let me win or whether they were competitive enough to beat me during an interview process. And two, to see whether they did.
But what if they were terrible?
Down, and open up a little bit more. And typically they did open up and, relax a little bit. So that was always a sneaky tactic I used.
I like that, and I hope we could get back to it. Bryan, what keeps you up at night these days?
Jet lag usually, but I'm often working on a number of sort of priority challenges with the leadership team, and what keeps me up at night is I always have this sense that somebody more experienced has solved this challenge better and quicker than me, and that keeps me up at night, knowing that there's a great solution out there. I just haven't landed on it yet, and I'll fixate on challenges from that perspective, and sometimes I'll drive myself crazy thinking about it.
And that heavy is the crown of the leadership. So let's bring it home here, Bryan. And for me, this show is my masterclass. It's my postgraduate doctorate program. And I learned through osmosis. I learned from interviewing, amazingly incredible experienced folks like yourself. So Bryan, what is the greatest piece of advice that you've ever received that you take action on every single day of your life?
So I remember in the early days of starting the company, and I really didn't know what I was doing at all. And I got a business mentor, which was the best decision of my career. To surround myself with mentors, and I've always done that for 17 years. But the first piece of advice I got from my first mentor was to double my prices, because it got me out of a whole heap of challenges. And what was underneath that piece of very practical advice was, because I was small and because I was just starting out, I undervalued the services and the value I was bringing. And that was a really valuable lesson, because I doubled my prices. And what I found was people were more willing to invest in my products and services at the time because I was more expensive. It was reassuringly expensive, or just equitable in the marketplace, actually. And from that, every year I've written a strategic plan. I've put it in a drawer. Usually it's on Boxing Day, the day after Christmas. And I'll go back to it 2 weeks later with one goal, and that is to make it bigger. Because I always catch myself not thinking big enough. And it's the worst reason to not scale or to grow at the pace you would like to, because of your limiting beliefs. And it's a weakness of mine that I consciously have to rectify and go through a routine to make sure I don't fall into that trap every year.
Well, thank you for your vulnerability and sharing that. I think it's extremely insightful talking to leaders about what their challenges are and the fear of growing bigger, or what's holding you back, or what the competitors are doing. And it's absolutely fascinating. We've all been through a lot, in the past 13 months, and we like to focus on the good on the show. We like to end the show on a positive note. So I'd love if you could share a personal silver lining and a professional silver lining that you've experienced in the last year?
Yeah, so that's actually quite straightforward. I remember the pandemic has actually galvanized our team. I feel like even though we haven't physically been in the same room, there's 75 of us who feel closer together. And just a few months ago, I got into a routine of posting a video update at least once a week to the team, just so up the communication, so everybody knows what's going on, to put people's mind at ease. And one particular week, I just didn't have the strength to get out of bed, never mind make a video. I was having a low period, and thankfully, I made the video, and I just told the team, I am having a really low week. I'm struggling to motivate myself, and it's a challenge. So I say this just almost as an apology because I haven't got much to update you with this week. And what I found was I wasn't leading the team that week. They were leading me. And for a number of weeks, people checked in on me and all the rest of it. And it really did show me the value of being open and honest and vulnerable. People thanked me for that vulnerability and moment of weakness because they felt it was okay to share similar stories. And I've made some real relationships in the organization with people that I don't necessarily work with on a daily basis, but we had that thing that we could share, you know. So I learned a lot from my team over the last 12 months. And I think it made me a better leader because of it.
Would you say that the pandemic has been good for the culture of PH Creative?
I mean, I think you've got to put aside all of the personal upset and atrocity. You know, we've had some real personal sort of dark days in PH over the last 12 months. However, that aside,
Of course.
it's made us much stronger. It's made us much consciously focused, much more emotionally intelligent as an organization. And we've done things differently because we've had to. And I think, yes, that has definitely made us stronger as a result. Absolutely.
That's awesome. That's great to hear. And last but not least, you look back in your career, you look at those, the tough days at the magazine, those late hours, those days when you can't stand to smell that Bluto looking boss that you had, the ups and downs, those early stages, the early days of building an agency and scaling it. And you had to dig down deep. And you had to harness that tenacity that you have inside. And in the same breath, when we're having this conversation now, and you're thankful for your team, for your health, for what you have built, and you're grateful, what is your focus? What is your compass? Bryan Adams, what is your North Star?
I get up every day and I work on an organization, and my vision, my sort of personal North Star, is to create an organization that people love and are passionate about as much as me, to create something which has meaning and purpose. And that's probably something I'll need to work on every day, because you can't please all the people all the time. But that's what I strive for. And I think we're a small company, in the grand scheme of it, but we've got a big vision. Seeing other people work incredibly hard to work towards a vision that I set is immensely gratifying. And I struggle to put that into words, actually, but that motivates me and keeps me focused.
As you say that, it resonates with me. I'm building an agency here, and I'm building a team, and it's a really fascinating idea, feeling, and concept internally to feel that. And I really do deeply appreciate you sharing that with all of us. Thank you for spending time with us this evening across the pond. For more on PH, visit ph-creative.com. Bryan, thank you so much for joining us. Where can folks connect with you directly if they wish?
So great. Thanks a lot, Adam. You can find me on LinkedIn, Bryan Adams with a Y and PH-creative. Love to connect on LinkedIn. That'd be great.
Well, it'd be great if you accept my connection request when we get off this call right now, because I tried to tag you in something, but that's all good there, mate. Thank you, Bryan. Thank you so much. Hang with me for one moment here. And everyone listening at home, in your cars, hopefully back on your commute. If you're jogging, walking the dog, walking the kids, or just sitting around, thank you for joining us on the podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it. Please leave a review, rating. Spread the word. And you know where to find us, all of us, at thepodcast.com. Remember, take care of each other, wash your hands, stay 6 feet apart, and catch us next week for another great episode of the podcast.
Wisdom is forever, but for us, it's time to go. Thank you for joining us. Luckily, we'll be back with our next episode soon, jam-packed with more incredible humans. Thank you for listening, subscribing, and sharing. To join the conversation, search the podcast on LinkedIn. And to catch up on past episodes and more info, please visit www.thepodcast.com.